calls us family.
You and you.
Kids in the middle. What I thought was a complete life was nowhere near complete, but it is now.
Learn about adopting a teen from foster care. You can't imagine the reward. Visit adoptuskids.org.
Welcome to NTD Newsroom. I'm Don Ma. President Trump laying out the terms of the war with Iran. That's as the Pentagon says the U.S. has only just begun to fight. The U.S. and Israel are increasing attacks on Iran, the Jewish state striking a bunker where the leftover Iranian regime is hiding. The fighting is also intensifying in Lebanon, and Iran keeps firing attack drones at Gulf states, the latest on the fast-developing war. Nearly 24,000 Americans have safely returned to the United States from the Middle East. Meanwhile, the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad is urging U.S. citizens to leave Iraq after reporting that Iranian-backed terrorist militias could target hotels in Iraqi Kurdistan. Low-cost one-way attack drones are being used in the first attacks on Iran. The United States reverse-engineered the design from Iranian drones to use against the Iranian regime. Kristi Noem is out as Secretary of Homeland Security. Remarks from Senator Markwayne Mullin, who's been tapped by President Trump to take the position. The February jobs report showing an unexpected job loss. More on the numbers and reactions from National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett. Thank you for staying with us. The U.S. and Israel increasing attacks on Iran, the Jewish state striking a bunker where the leftover Iranian regime is hiding. The fighting is intensifying, especially in Lebanon, where Hezbollah terrorists try supporting Iran by attacking Israel. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pastor has the latest on the fast-developing war.
That's right, and President Trump is laying out the terms of this war. He's saying that there will be no deal with Iran except, quote, unconditional surrender. And he says that after that and the selection of great and acceptable leaders, we and many of our wonderful and very brave allies and partners will work tirelessly to bring Iran back from the brink of destruction, making it, quote, economically bigger, better, and stronger than ever before. The president is also vowing that Iran will have a strong and prosperous future. And this is coming as the Pentagon says their fight in Operation Epic Fury is only just beginning. Take a look.
Iran is hoping that we cannot sustain this, which is a really bad miscalculation for the IRGC in Iran. Our commitment to our mission objectives only increases as our advantages continue to increase. We've got no shortage of munitions. Our stockpiles of defensive and offensive weapons allow us to sustain this campaign as long as we need to. Again, our munition status only increases as our advantage increases. Our capabilities, we have only just begun to fight and fight decisively.
Then if I just look back over the last 24 hours of the operation compared to where we were at start, ballistic missile attacks have decreased by 90% since day one. Drone attacks have decreased by 83% since day one. Having said this, we remain vigilant. Our strikes against the Iranian Navy have intensified.
This is coming as President Trump also tells Axios that he needs to be involved in selecting the Iranian regime's next leader, and that it can't be someone aligned with the Ayatollah's policies, that it needs to be someone who will bring peace and harmony to the region. And today, big defense contractors from Boeing, Honeywell, Lockheed Martin, RTX are all expected to meet with President Trump at the White House to talk about ramping up weapons production, especially missile interceptors. The White House saying that this meeting was previously scheduled, saying that it's not a direct response to the war in Iran. And meanwhile, the White House is also responding to 53 House Democrats voting against declaring Iran a state sponsor of terrorism last night. Take a look.
Nearly 3 years ago in 2023, every single member of the House of Representatives, with the exception of one, voted together on this resolution condemning Iran as the world's state leading sponsor of terror. And now in 2026, you have Democrats on Capitol Hill who have been so debilitated by their derangement and their hatred for the man in the Oval Office right now that they cannot even condemn the world's leading state sponsor of terror. Why? Because they are trying desperately to try to undermine President Trump's essential action that he took to protect the United States of America, to protect our bases and our troops in the Middle East, and to ultimately ensure a more safe and prosperous world, not just in the Middle East, but across the entire globe as well.
And Dawn, tomorrow President Trump will be heading to Doral, Florida, where he'll be meeting with 17 heads of state from 17 Latin American countries to launch what he's calling the Shield of the Americas Summit. That's aimed at countering cartels in the Western Hemisphere. Back to you.
Mari, thank you. The Trump administration has announced a $20 billion reinsurance program for oil tankers and other vessels moving through the Strait of Hormuz. Officials say the plan aims to restore confidence in maritime trade amid continuing U.S. and Israeli strikes against Iran. The International Development Finance Corporation and Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent announced the plan. The program will be in coordination with U.S. Central Command. According to the administration, the move will help stabilize international commerce and support American and allied businesses operating in the Middle East. Now, insurance will focus on hull, machinery, and cargo first. 20% of global oil moves through the Strait of Hormuz every day. Now, since strikes on Iran began, oil shipments through the waterway have largely been blocked. A number of tankers have been damaged or stranded as well. The latest February jobs report showing losses in the economy in the U.S. Joining us now to give us his insights on this is Michael Busler, economist, public policy analyst, and professor of finance at Stockton University. Michael, really great to talk to you this Friday afternoon. So, as you heard, 92,000 job losses in the month of February, the month of February. So, I mean, do you think the labor market is softening right now?
So in economics, we always say 1 month does not make a trend. So we saw very strong job numbers in January, over 120,000, and in February, we now had a net loss of jobs for 90,000. That could be due to a number of factors. We had very severe weather in February, and sometimes companies lose business and have to lay people off. So I wouldn't get too concerned about it for 1 month. If it occurs for another month or so, then we say we have a problem. I still believe the economy will grow at about a 4% rate this year. It grew at a 4% rate in the second and third quarter, slowed down in the fourth quarter of last year, mostly because the government was shut down for almost half of the quarter. From January to mid-November, the government was shut down. But most economists are figuring a rebound and somewhere in the 3 to 4% growth range. I'm favoring more towards the 4% range. And we'll just have to wait and see how these future job numbers look. Also, remember, these job numbers are constantly revised. So you can't get too excited when you have a real good number, as we did in January, and you shouldn't get too worried if you have a bad number in February. They'll likely be resolved, and we'll see how the rest of the months go to see if there's a trend.
Okay, and I just wanted to add, there were also a number of job strikes in the last month, which may have contributed as well, but those job strikes won't be happening in the month of March, so we'll keep an eye out on that. But just let me get your thoughts on the unemployment rate going up as well. I think it was 4.4%.
Yeah, it was 4.3 last month. It went up to 4.4. Now, there's a number of factors that go into account there. It's not just we lost jobs, but it's what the labor force participation rate was. In other words, are we still getting the same amount of adults, same percentage of adults entering being part of the job market or not? So again, we can't really tell by 1 month. We're going to have to wait and see what happens going forward. Clearly, though, this is not good news.
Okay, so moving on from the jobs report, let's talk about President Trump announcing a $20 billion reinsurance program for oil tankers and other maritime traffic. going through the Strait of Hormuz. Do you think this is a net benefit for energy going through the strait?
Yes. So a large amount of oil flows through the Straits of Hormuz. I don't know if Iran has the capability to shut that down. All of their large naval vessels have been destroyed. They still have a number of smaller ones, these speedboats they have that may be able to do some damage. So oil companies, when they have tankers, they fill it up with oil and they take it to the destination. They have insurance. So should anything happen, the insurance covers any losses. Because it's a war situation, the insurance company said, don't go through there. Even though the U.S. says it's okay, don't go through there. We're still concerned that it's very dangerous and we may lose tankers and we're not going to pay for it if you go through there. So President Trump said we would issue a reinsurance program. So what does that mean? So if the insurance company's losses get large, the reinsurance company will pay the losses. The idea is to minimize the risk to the insurance companies so they'll continue to insure the naval vessels and they'll be able to flow through. If they don't go through, it severely restricts the supply of oil. And when you restrict the supply of anything, the price goes up. Already, oil, I think it's approaching $80 a barrel. I didn't look this morning, but it was approaching $80 a barrel. And that's translating into gasoline, in the $3.30, $3.35 a gallon range, which we don't want. So the idea of this reinsurance is to try to keep the Straits of Hormuz open and knowing that vessels will be insured and insurance companies' loss will be minimized because the federal government, U.S. government, will reinsure.
So, as you said, this program is trying to make sure that oil moves through the strait. But do you think companies have considerations besides insurance that sometimes maybe it's just not worth it because of physical security of the Iran war?
Yeah. So that's certainly there, and we want to try to minimize it. Now, President Trump has said we're going to keep the straits open. We've destroyed all of the large vessels Iran has. They still have drones. We now have these laser shooting things that'll shoot the drones out that we're starting to use. But the idea is we have to give confidence to these companies so that they don't take that view. There's too much risk. I don't want to take the risk. I'm not sending any oil through. That would cause so much of a disruption in the oil market. Oil prices would go up even higher, and gasoline prices would go higher. Fortunately, the world is not that dependent on Middle East oil as it was, 30, 40 years ago. So if you had a problem in the Middle East, oil prices would really spike, probably going up over $100 a barrel. Because we don't rely so much on Middle East oil, even if it's curtailed like this, price will go up, but it probably won't go up anywhere near $100 a barrel. And if Trump's plan in this reinsurance gives companies and insurance companies and oil companies enough confidence to keep going, then it'll minimize any of the negative effects of high energy prices on the economy.
So, Michael, are taxpayers on the hook then if payouts do in fact happen to insure these ships?
Yeah, anytime the government spends money, remember the government doesn't have any money. All the government has is what they collect in revenue, mostly from individual taxpayers and corporations. So if the government has to spend more money, it's the taxpayers that ultimately have to pay that. Now, Trump will argue, I don't think we're going to have to spend that much on this reinsurance because we'll keep the straits open. Even if we have to spend some, that's going to be less of a burden to us than having the price of oil go up real high and energy prices all around will go high. That will have a very negative impact on the economy and could end up costing hundreds of billions of dollars. So Trump will say it's a cost benefit, and Trump will say it's worth it to reinsure here, even if the taxpayers may be on the hook for some of it.
All right, Michael, before we wrap up here, I wanted to talk to you about how this impacts China, because as you know, China is a major customer of Iranian oil. So how is China's economy going to be impacted by this war in Iran?
So China gets over half of its energy. I saw one study that said up to 70% of its energy from the Middle East. With China's economy, a lot of the data we get from China is not that reliable. They've been saying that they've been growing 8 to 10% a year. Some of my colleagues that study the Chinese economy say it's probably much less than that. Well, they've been saying 8 to 10%, and it's probably grown at about 4 or 5. Now they're saying it's going to only grow at about 4 or 5%, which really means it'll slow down to probably the 1 or 2% growth range. For a country like China that has a lot of consumer debt, a lot of housing that the Chinese people have been financed, taking out very large mortgages. As long as you're generating income, both the country and individuals, having debt is not a problem. But if you start to see reductions in income, both for the country and individuals, and they can't meet the mortgage payments, then you start to run into defaults. And with China, that's a very sensitive problem. They won't let large-scale defaults happen, but it will be a problem for them, and it could be a very costly problem if this thing lasts fairly long.
And I just wanted to add, Michael, China is a manufacturing economy, exporting economy, and for manufacturing, what do you need? You need energy, right? So without its major supplier, Iran, I mean, is that going to just exacerbate its debt situation, as you mentioned just now?
Yeah, yes, it will. Now, China's exports to the U.S. have gone down, but China has been able to find other countries, mostly in Asia, for their products. And as a result of that, their total exports have not gone down that much. But if energy is cut off, as you point out correctly, to produce goods, you need energy to operate these factories. And if the supply gets cut off, they're going to have to start shutting down some factories because they don't have energy. And then that could cause their economy to really slow down and cause problems.
Okay, well, Michael, great conversation as always. Hope you have a great weekend. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. You as well.
And that was NTD's Washington correspondent Mari Otsu reporting. The U.S. and Israel increasing attacks on Iran, the Jewish state striking a bunker where the leftover Iranian regime is hiding. The fighting is intensifying, especially in Lebanon, where Hezbollah terrorists try supporting Iran by attacking Israel. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar, this time, for real, the latest on the fast-developing war.
Fighting in the Middle East continues intensifying. Multiple targets in Iran's capital city, Tehran, being hit, with smoke seen rising from various locations. The US releasing this video showing strikes on an Iranian drone carrier ship, with officials saying the vessel was roughly the size of a World War II aircraft carrier. America's goal is to completely destroy the Iranian Navy. Over 30 vessels are at the bottom of the ocean already. And Israel releasing this video of its strikes on Tehran. The Jewish state is launching a new wave of attacks, saying 50 warplanes struck a bunker beneath Tehran, being used by Iran's leadership.
I utterly believe that once you undermine this empire of evil emanating from Tehran, we will be able to offer venues of peace, goodwill, and prosperous future for the people of the Middle East.
The US and Israel can roam freely above Iran after gaining full control over its airspace just a few days ago. According to the Iranian Red Crescent Society, over 1,000 people are being reported dead so far. The leftover Islamic regime still trying to defend itself. Footage shows Iran intercepting Israeli missiles in night skies above Tehran. Iran also continues attacking nearby countries, with the latest strikes involving US partners Bahrain, Kuwait and others. Iran striking over a dozen countries since the fighting began less than a week ago. In Israel, meanwhile, sirens are being heard across Tel Aviv. Several residents are left slightly wounded near the city after an Iranian missile attack. No casualties are being reported, as eyewitness footage shows Israel's Iron Dome intercepting incoming Iranian attacks. And the fighting is intensifying, especially in neighboring Lebanon. Israel is striking sites used by Hezbollah terrorists, which the Iranian regime has long funded, trained and supported. The Israeli military saying it carried out 26 waves of strikes overnight. Lebanon was pulled into the war after Hezbollah started attacking Israel on Monday in support of Iran. Arian Pastar, NTD News.
And the U.S. Central Command says Iran continues to fire at civilian targets in the Gulf states. CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper posting a statement moments ago. The statement says the Iranian regime fired 7 attack drones last night at civilian and residential neighborhoods in Bahrain. Bahrain is a small Gulf state and partner of the U.S. as well as a member of the Abraham Accords. He adds that Iran has attacked 12 different countries in the Middle East so far and continues to deliberately target civilians. The commander says, quote, "This is unacceptable and will not go unanswered. We will continue working with regional partners to address this threat to innocent people across the region." President Trump saying today there will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender. Joining us now to talk about the latest in Iran is Gerard Filitti, Middle East Affairs Analyst and attorney specializing in international law. Gerard, good afternoon. So what does unconditional surrender actually mean for the regime in Iran?
Unconditional surrender means that they stop fighting, essentially. But that is done on the terms that President Trump dictates. And that goes back to what our position has been from the beginning. No nuclear weapons development, no ballistic missile development, no funding of international terrorism. These are preconditions that President Trump was explicit about. So unconditional surrender does not mean we will negotiate the terms. It means that Iran agrees, the new government of Iran agrees fundamentally to these changes.
So you laid out what it means. What are the chances in your mind that Iran will stop fighting and surrender? What's going to happen to the remaining regime personnel if they do surrender?
Well, I think it's too soon to say that Iran is going to stop fighting. They still are in this fight. I think that we need to degrade their capabilities even more, take out more of their weapon sites and also some of their leadership potentially. I think that what we will see is a transition. I think that most people in the Islamic Republic, the regime itself, want to survive. They see that this is a futile act, that the United States and Israel have air dominance, have missile dominance, have the ability to pound them and destroy all of their assets. So ultimately, there will be a desire by the regime, whichever is in charge, to negotiate a way out. But as Donald Trump has said explicitly, there isn't a negotiation to be had until they lay down their weapons, until they stop fighting.
All right, understood. So I have a soundbite here of President Trump talking about the future of Iran at the White House. Let's take a look.
We also urge Iranian diplomats around the world to request asylum and to help us shape a new and better Iran with great potential. It's a country with great potential. There's much better future for Iran. It's now beginning. It's going to be, I think, a great future. And the United States will ensure that whoever leads the country next, Iran will not threaten America or its neighbors, Israel, anybody.
So, Gerard, the Board of Peace is already at work planning to rebuild Gaza. Now Trump wants to rebuild Iran. It sure is an ambitious plan. What would that entail, rebuilding Iran?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head. When you look at the countries that have signed up to be part of that Board of Peace, clearly these are the same countries that have a very big interest in making sure that Iran is stable, democratic, and moves forward with peace and stability in the region. So I do think that a democratic transition in Iran will see the Board of Peace come in to help rebuild. What that means, let's not forget what Iran was like in 1979 before the Islamic Revolution. It was an economic powerhouse. It was easily doing trade with Europe, with Asia, with the United States. That is something that can happen again. All it takes is rebuilding some of the infrastructure, but more importantly, having people in government who are willing to set aside the biases and the hate of the Islamic Republic and be open to economic dialogue, be open to social improvements. And that is very much within reach, and that is what rebuilding Iran will look like. It's not just rebuilding infrastructure. It's rebuilding a mentality of being open to peace and stability and not to the destructive paths that we've seen from the current regime.
Now, Gerard, let me get your comments on this. Iran's foreign minister warned that it would be a disaster for the U.S. if there was a ground invasion. How are you reading this warning?
Well, look, Iran has a lot of tough talk that it's still giving. It's even for domestic consumption, putting out propaganda videos of them destroying American aircraft or American warships. None of it is true. Ultimately, I think that we will not see U.S. boots on the ground. I think we will not see Israeli boots on the ground. I think the Iranian people themselves have been urged repeatedly by President Trump to take back their country. We may see insurgencies. We may see Kurdish forces striking up a rebellion in parts of Iran and other ethnic groups as well. But ultimately, it is up to the people of Iran, if they want to take back their government, to do so. It will not be U.S. boots on the ground.
So, Gerard, we've seen a lot of support for President Trump in Middle Eastern countries and elsewhere as well. Would you say this level of support is unprecedented? What do you think about that?
It's very much unprecedented in the last 40 years of American diplomacy in the region. America is coming at this not just from a position of military strength and willingness to engage to do the right thing, but we are looking at building economic stability in the region. The path towards stability and peace is through trade, through economic betterment, through improving the lives of the people in the Middle East. And the people and governments that are allied with America see that. They see that it is in their interests to build bridges and build economic stability, not to invest their money in wars. That is why we're seeing President Trump have such a dramatic effect on the Middle East.
So, Gerard, you said we probably won't see boots on the ground in Iran. Do you think, just finally, the U.S. is capable of completing this mission only by air?
I think in large part we are when we look at the threat to the West, the threat to the U.S. and Israel and the Middle East is largely through ballistic missiles, through cruise missiles, through drones. And once we destroy that infrastructure, and if we keep degrading Iran's military capability domestically, there's no need for boots on the ground. Look, ultimately, as in Venezuela, we really don't care the name of the person who's in charge of Iran. We just want the country to decide for itself what to do, and to do so in a way that is not threatening to the West and to the United States. We can achieve that without boots on the ground, and that's a big difference between what President Trump is doing now and what previous administrations have tried to do in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Okay, Gerard, sounds good. Thank you for speaking with us. Hope you have a great weekend.
Thank you, Don. You as well.
According to the State Department, nearly 24,000 Americans have safely returned to the United States from the Middle East. Some of them took a charter flight on a plane belonging to the New England Patriots. That flight landing in Washington, D.C. this morning. The State Department says many Americans have safely relocated to other countries. Others have departed from the Middle East but are still in transit back to the U.S. More flights are scheduled for the coming days, depending on the security situation, that is. The department is urging American citizens in need of assistance in Oman, Kuwait, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and Israel to fill out a crisis intake form. Once completed, American citizens in those countries will receive information about upcoming charter flights and ground transportation options. Meanwhile, the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad reported that Iranian-backed terrorist militias could target hotels in Iraqi Kurdistan. The embassy urged American citizens to depart as soon as it is safe to leave. In a post on X, the embassy said there are no flights leaving Iraq at this time. The embassy advised U.S. citizens to consider traveling by land to enter Jordan, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, and Turkey. However, those border crossings may close without warning. The dignified transfer of the 6 U.S. soldiers killed in action during an Iranian drone strike is taking place tomorrow at Dover Air Force Base. The White House says President Trump will attend the transfer, and Iowa Congressman Zach Nunn says he also plans to be there. All 6 soldiers were part of the same Army Reserve Command in Des Moines, Iowa, before their deployment to Kuwait. Meanwhile, the U.S. is restoring diplomatic relations with Venezuela after 7 years. It comes as interim authorities govern Venezuela following the capture of former dictator Nicolas Maduro. Here's more.
The U.S. State Department says the move will promote stability, support economic recovery, and advance what it calls political reconciliation in Venezuela. Maduro cut diplomatic ties with the U.S. in 2019 after Washington refused to recognize him as the country's president. Venezuela's interim government says it's committed to entering a new phase of constructive dialogue grounded in what it called the sovereign equality of states. The latest U.S. official in Venezuela was Doug Burgum, Secretary of the Interior. He says the U.S. is very pleased with the direction the country's going in.
We certainly talked about a positive future for this country. And there's a number of things that are happening, again, under the current leadership that are very positive for everybody in this country. And I think you're seeing that in the laws that are being passed. They're, again, creating a framework that is going to be more peace, more stability, and more prosperity for the people of Venezuela.
The White House says the Trump administration will be reinforcing its Monroe Doctrine during its Shield of Americas summit this weekend to try to help Latin American countries reduce ties with China. Joining us now to talk about this is Santiago Vidal-Calvo, policy analyst at the Manhattan Institute, and we have Marcos Chatgas, editor-in-chief for the Epoch Times Brazil and Latin America correspondent for the Epoch Times USA. Okay, so good afternoon to you both. San Diego, if I may, I'll start with you today. Can you just talk to us here about the level of influence China and other adversarial nations have in Latin America?
Hey, Don, thank you so much for the invitation. So first of all, China has gone unchecked for years now in Latin America, where they have done massive investments in shady loans to many countries. They have invested in infrastructure, try to get takeovers of very key and very important interests of the United States in the region. And they have a strong armed, many leftist governments around the region to bring them over to their side and to get them away from the sphere of influence of the United States. This has happened over the last decades, and it has gone under the radar of the United States because many of these governments prefer a China that is giving them a free checkbook, a blank check, before a United States that has some conditions about prosperity in the Western Hemisphere and about the security and the interests of the United States. However, this seems to stop with the Trump administration. The Trump administration is taking a posture that China needs to be kicked out of the continent. The Monroe Doctrine renewal is the same type of theory that we're implementing today to kick out foreign regimes and foreign adversaries from our continent because it's ours. And this is the policy that the Trump administration is taking, and it's a good one.
Okay, Marcos, please, anything you'd like to add here about China's influence in Latin America?
Well, I agree with the points that are being made, but I would also like to highlight the fact that this comes as the U.S. Congress has just published a recent report. The Committee on China in the House has just published a recent report where we talk about military capabilities. So we're talking about dual-use capabilities in ports, even space. In Argentina, in the Neuquén province, in the Patagonia region, you have a space base which is directly run by the People's Liberation Army. Not even the administration has free access to it without the PLA's approval. So we're talking about a threat that, as the points, and I agree with the points that were made, they go into influence. When we talk finance, they go into influence. When we talk infrastructure, telecom, and there's also a military side to it with the dual use of military civil technology, military-civil fusion. I also think that the timing of this is very important to highlight as it comes before an expected visit by President Trump to China still this semester, perhaps in April. So all of this ties into the context of the strategic competition between the US and China, and also has a military side.
So Santiago, both of you talked about certain threats and influence that China exerts in Latin America. Can you just put into perspective for us from the U.S.'s point of view? Why does this matter? What threat does this influence pose to the U.S. interests?
Well, let me tell you that some of the biggest...
Oh, please.
I'll have Santiago go first, and then Marcos, I'll ask you.
Awesome, thank you. Sorry about that. So let me tell you that the biggest threats that China had on the continent to the United States have already been dissipated, which was Venezuela. I would say one of the main threats, both in security terms, but also in economic terms for the region. What was this representing? Venezuela was giving oil to Cuba and to adversaries across the world, like Iran and China. This has ceased after the capture of Nicolas Maduro. And this looks very grim to China now, that they have lost one of their key partners in the region. If Cuba falls too, China would also lose one of their main partners in the region. They would only be left with some of the leftist parties around other countries like Colombia or like Ecuador or like Brazil and Argentina that do not have much power anymore because they're in process of transition after a Trump administration has put a big influence in the continent, and presidents like Milei and Bukele have made it their goals to kick out a lot of these leftist parties from the continent. So there is an interest of the United States politically to align the continent politically with the United States. But second, security measures. We cannot have rampant dictators in the region that are allies of China making threats or even having security interests or problems with the United States. And this is what was happening with Venezuela and also happening with Cuba and Nicaragua. If the Trump administration is able to remove those regimes and move them into stable democratic countries, that would be the biggest blow to China in the last decade.
So, Marcos, before you respond here, Santiago brought up Cuba, right? I have a clip here of President Trump hinting at action in Cuba recently after making some comments. Let's take a look at that clip.
We also urge Iranian diplomats around the world to request asylum and to help us shape a new and better Iran with great potential. It's a country with great potential. There's much better future for Iran. It's now beginning. It's going to be, I think, a great future. And people, I want to thank all of the people that have been involved. Marco, you've been doing a fantastic job. And you've been doing a fantastic job on a place called Cuba. What's happening with Cuba is amazing. And we think that we want to finish this one first, but that will be just a question of time.
So, Marcos, in your view, what needs to happen in Cuba to align with our national security interests and to help the Cuban people? Just your overall thoughts on this.
I mean, we're talking about a regime that's very hostile to the U.S. and historically we have seen how this can be a security threat. In 1962, we had the Cuban Missile Crisis, where we went nearly into World War III over Soviet missiles that were put in Cuba. The geographical position of Cuba is once again being weaponized, as we can see from reports in recent years of Chinese influence. And we're talking space capabilities and other asymmetrical warfare, unconventional warfare capabilities being deployed to Cuba on a regime that has before been tied also with Russia and to a very lesser degree to Iran, which was mainly acting in and around Venezuela. So it also has this point to it, but it has also a symbolic aspect. When we talk about the hardest communist guerrilla, the hardest cartels in the region, when we talk about the FARC in Colombia and the ELN in Colombia, when we talk about Varpalmares, MR8 in Brazil in the past century, when we talk about cartels and guerrillas all around the region, most of them have been to a point inspired, trained, or backed by Cuba in one way or another. So the sort of zeitgeist shift, the shift in the spirit of the times that we're discussing, is especially symbolic when we talk about Cuba. And right now, the regime seems to be, in fact, in their last breath. Of course, it might be soon to say in a way, but we just had massive blackouts with 7 million people with no access to electricity in the past few days. So this also bespeaks of the moment we're seeing. And just to add to the point that Santiago was making, I think he's completely right. I would also add the economic dimension. When we talk about lithium in Bolivia, Chile, and Argentina, which is key for technologies like electric cars and resources around the region that can be useful, like Brazil having the second biggest reserves of rare earths, which have been in the news a lot lately.
So, Santiago, you can add something more if you would like, but I want to actually circle back to China. There's one thing I wanted to ask you specifically, and that is about China's ports that it has built in some of these Latin American countries. Could they have, dual use capabilities? For example, could it theoretically be used for military purposes?
Well, let me tell you something. China does nothing out of benevolence and charity. And I think this is what we're seeing across the continent. The only reason why China is involved in Latin America is because they have an interest to have some sort of investment there that is going to advance their purpose here in Latin America. And what is their purpose? To diminish the influence of the United States. That is the only purpose that China is having. The second purpose that you can try to bring is make money, but, everybody wants to make money in this world, and China has obviously different ulterior motives. And this is the issue, is that we have not seen in Latin America the investment from China like we saw it in other places around the world. We saw the Belt and Road Initiative being implemented in Africa, in Asia, in the Middle East. Why not see it also in Latin America as an extension of the Belt and Road Initiative? And this has been this case over the last decades. China has invested in ports for their infrastructure, for their security interests. If they control the ports of Latin America, they control the trade of Latin America. And we saw this with the ruling and with the influence that had the Panama Canal on the last couple of months. This has been the influence that China has had. If we continue to allow China, not only ports, but communication, China has invested billions of dollars in communication infrastructure in Latin America, spaceport. I 100% agree with Marcos here on what he's saying with the security interests of China in the region. They have seen Latin America as an adversary of the United States, and Cuba has been a huge influence to implement those goals from China around the continent, because they both have the same goals, to take the United States down. So if we have two big adversaries of the United States trying to do exactly the same thing, then it's only the most appropriate method for the United States to do the contrary, to try to bring them down in the continent and bring allies closer to ours.
So, Marcos, give us your concerns on these specific items, whether we're talking about the ports, the infrastructure investments, debt trap practices. Talk to us about your concerns on these, and what leverage does the U.S. have to convince these Latin American countries to shift their alliance closer to the U.S.?
I mean, the leverage has been increasing. For instance, of course, the attacks on the Caribbean on the narco boats have a big impression. When we're talking about the shift in the international environment, we're talking about the traditional way international relations have been conducted, with the United Nations or other organizations being middlemen, shifting essentially to what it used to be before World War II. We're talking about economic pressure, military pressure, and this kind of diplomacy where it's mostly about bilateral relations and even personal relations between the heads of both countries. This shift has allowed the Trump administration to be more assertive and increase its leverage. And this is, I see, a much needed shift when we talk about the geopolitics of the region. So let me expand a little bit on the ports. When we talk about the Shanghai port in Peru, for instance, this is now run by a company called Costco Shipping. There's a lawsuit going on. I won't go into details, but this is now run by a company called Costco Shipping, which is considered part of the Chinese military apparatus by the United States of America. We now have a data cable in Chile, which could essentially have the data of Latin American countries going straight to Hong Kong under the CCP's influence. All of this goes through 2017 cybersecurity law in China, then 2021 anti-espionage law, and other laws put in by the regime, which breach data safety and also allows the Chinese Communist Party to exert pressure by essentially accessing any data they have on any of those countries when you're talking about data cables, right? This goes beyond just the possibility of conventional warfare. So it's not that the ports could be used by a Chinese aircraft carrier to attack the US. That's a farther away possibility, despite theoretically possible. It's about the fact that if a war breaks in the Strait of Taiwan, in the Taiwan Strait, we would be talking about a scenario where the Chinese could pressure Latin American countries into continuing to export iron ore, into continuing to export food, like Brazil, which is one of the biggest food suppliers to China. We could see that supply chains and diplomatic legitimacy could be provided by countries nearby the United States. So when we talk about the war scenario, I think that's the kind of thing that's into discussion. Now, regarding leverage, like I said, I think it's about bilateral diplomacy, personal relations from Trump with leaders in the region. I think it's also about military and economic pressure, which has been hugely leveraged throughout his first year in the second administration. Without going into too much detail, I think this gives the gist of it.
Okay, Santiago, two things. If there's anything you'd like to respond to from what Marco said, you can. And another thing is I wanted to ask you about Iran. You know, with everything that's happening right now with Operation Epic Fury, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about what is Iran's influence in Latin America?
Well, first, just to close what Marcos was saying, I think he's 100% right with what he's saying about China. And the best thing that the United States could do right now is double down on their influence in the continent, try to buy off a lot of these loans from China and try to offer countries currency swaps or currency deals that they could allow these countries to buy off the loans from China and change them to the United States. I think many of these countries would prefer to have their loans under the United States before China, where the influence of the United States can be controlled and China loses a leverage on the continent. That can be one of the things that the United States could be doing, and they have both the money and the capability and the interest to do this. But to go in Iran specifically, Iran has had many partners around the region that has helped them advance their interests, but one of the main ones was Venezuela with Hezbollah. Hezbollah had a huge presence in Venezuela because Venezuela was treated as a safe haven for terrorism during the Maduro regime and before in the Chavez regime as well. We have pictures of Chavez with the previous president of Iran. They were good buddies, and even the president of Iran, the former president of Iran, used to go to the funeral of Chavez. That was 2 days ago. Yesterday, we were celebrating almost 12 years of the death of Chavez. So, you know, this is very important relationship for the region. And after Maduro's capture, Iran's influence in the continent has greatly been reduced. You know, people underestimate how much of an influence Venezuela and Iran had in the relationship around the continent. Hezbollah has set up security and interest for Iran in Venezuela to spy on the United States, even so much that there are reports from Congress and also from Venezuela that Venezuela gave 10,000 fake Venezuelan passports to Iranian nationals to cross the border here illegally in the United States and enter Hezbollah officials that enter under Venezuelan fake passports. This happened under the last years, and you know, it happened under the watch of the United States. And we need to fix this really quickly. And one of the main steps was to remove Maduro from power.
Okay, Marcos, I'll end with you today. Your final thoughts on Iran's influence in Latin America.
So just to expand on what Santiago was saying, the passport scheme in Venezuela was so big that in 2007, they even planned a terrorist attack on JFK Airport in New York coming from Guyana and Venezuela, which was thwarted last minute by the FBI. We're talking about narco cartels throughout the region, trading in arms and drugs with Hezbollah, including nearby where I'm at right now in the Argentina, Paraguay, Brazil border in Foz do Iguaçu. This is the kind of thing which has created also an influx in the last administration of people in the US terror watch list throughout the southern border. And you see the menace of this rogue terrorist regime expanding throughout the US's neighbors and into the United States. In a matter of about 2 months, this administration has debunked this scheme to the point where its main leader in the region, Nicolás Maduro, is in jail, and its main leader in the Middle East, Ali Khamenei, is dead. We see a reversal of the US's adversaries' influence in the region, going from Iran to China, even to Moscow to an extent, because Venezuela was also a forward operating base for Russian influence in the region. This all comes not only before the summit we have on Saturday, but before President Trump's visit to Beijing in April or sometime in the first semester of this year. I think the message is very clear to the US adversaries, and when Donald Trump steps into China in the near future, he'll have the leverage of what has happened close to home in the past 2 or 3 months.
Okay, well, very profound conversation today, coming as no surprise from two incredible analysts. But thank you both for speaking with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Now, for more insights on the Chinese regime's internal struggles and instability, the upcoming meeting with President Trump and Chinese leader Xi Jinping, and how the U.S. operation in Iran is impacting China. For more on all this, joining us is David Zhang, China commentator and host of the YouTube show David on China. And of course, we have Casey Fleming, chairman and CEO of Black Ops Partners Corporation. He's also the author of the new book, The Red Tsunami. So first of all, welcome both. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. So David, I'll start with you today. You've got a viral post on X. You got a lot of them, but this one you wrote, guys, the CCP didn't even get attacked and 200 generals already died. So David, tell us what's going on here. Why is it significant? All right, David, just 1 second here. Just 1 second here. It seems like we're having technical issues. We can't actually hear what you're saying. I can see you, though. So let me just go to Casey first while we sort that out. So, Casey, what I wanted to talk to you about was tell us about the upcoming meeting known as the Two Sessions and why it's raising internal political interest among analysts right now. Just talk to us about your general thoughts here.
Well, it's very significant because because Xi Jinping has not really planned for these attacks on Venezuela, Mexican drug cartel, and Iran. So that plus his internal housekeeping and house cleaning of loyalty is very significant. So you put those two things together, he's basically caught on his back heels. He's cleaned out his entire cabinet of people. He has no war operational generals left, anybody who's seen war or commanded in war. Loyalty is so much more important in a totalitarian regime. And so I think if he's reading the tea leaves, pun intended, Taiwan should be off of his target list, at least for the interim.
All right, David, I think we got your sound back, so please continue. Talk to us about your post.
Yeah, it's basically what Casey was saying. Over the years, Xi has essentially destroyed its ability to fight a Taiwan Strait War, including the most recent, obviously, the generals Zhang Youxia and He Weidong as well, both of his left and right vice chairmen. So I think the point I was trying to make with that post, while it's half joking but also half serious, was that the 200 generals is effectively a representation of the current PLA combat capabilities, but also if you consider the reflection or the experience of the reality in Iran right now is the Chinese equipment can also be something that we need to talk about in its effectiveness. And I think another point is the reliability of China as a partner. All of these are questions that its allies need to ask.
Okay, so Casey, I wanted to get your thoughts on the purges that you're aware of that happened within the CCP. What is your assessment there? Where is this going?
Well, he's actually starting from scratch. In a totalitarian regime, loyalty is absolutely required. And so he had potentially a coup coming up after him. So he basically cleaned house. He's hoping that the second level, the junior officers, can lead him through this thing. But again, nobody's got combat experience. And plus the success of the last several instances, basically the WEF did, and the meeting there did not go the way that he wanted it to. And then coming right off the heels of that, you've got Venezuela, drug cartel, Iran as extremely strategic partners with the Chinese Communist Party. Those basically put the CCP on notice. But again, the point I want to make to everybody is all roads lead back to the CCP. Remember, they are the grand puppeteer. They're the grand strategists of this anti-US, anti-freedom, total communist movement that's going on in the world. It is, on a scale of 1 to 10, it's a 9.5, and death by 1,000 cuts, they're about 950 cuts in. So the message is, don't take your eye off the ball. Don't be distracted by the current, war of the week. The total focus should be on the Chinese Communist Party. And the point is, yes, they're hurting economically. They may go into a very dark place from an economic perspective and a military perspective, but they have what's now called a cornered rat syndrome. That goes for the IRGC, and that also goes for the Chinese Communist Party.
I'll just reiterate one more time your point, Casey. All roads lead back to the CCP. But David, if you were to characterize the level of instability within the Chinese Communist Party, how would you describe that?
Well, a great example is the two sessions going on right now. Zhang Youxia is still not removed from his assembly representative role. And that tells us that there's infighting. There's different factions still at play. And what we're seeing on the surface is not a clear representation of what's inside the party's power struggle. And so in times of what's happening around the world, the lack of reactions in particular with Iran, I think it's a great indicator that right now the CCP is all about shrinking its focus to stabilize internally first. Obviously, there's we've been talking about for years now, the economic issues. A lot of these are long-term problems. Now, we could see that, as Casey mentioned, the corner rat possible scenario, we could also see the alternative, which is that they just simply end up not being able to do anything. Now, both of these scenarios, we should be prepared for it. My personal sort of take right now with the current state of the party is that they're a little bit more messy than before. So the chance of them going on something like Taiwan could be smaller, but it doesn't mean that we should let our guards down.
Okay, Casey, so you said earlier that we shouldn't get distracted by the war of the week, but I still wanted to ask you, what is the effect of the operation in Iran going to be having on Chinese leadership right now? Strategically, what might they be thinking? How are they reacting to this?
Well, Ukraine was a test bed for the CCP. And so all of these, they're watching very, very closely, and they've got to be absolutely nervous. The power and the might of the U.S. military is very strong. Our ability to handle some of the new technologies like drones, so on, are very strong as well. But you cannot count them out. You just absolutely can't. They may go into remission for a while, but that cancer's coming back. And it's going to come back with a vengeance. What you can expect is them to amp up and increase their efforts around all other methods of unrestricted warfare, which are biological, which are drugged with fentanyl and all the other drugs, cognitive warfare, online, TikTok, other social media that they've compromised, mainstream media in the U.S. that they've compromised, some of our government leaders that they've compromised, Wall Street. You can watch them amp up. They've got the people. They've got them dedicated. Watch them amp up the unrestricted warfare piece of it to try to weaken us even further at a more advanced rate. Don't expect them to count them out and to their expanse and their success to this date is unmatched. It's remarkable at their destruction, infiltration, and subversion of the United States and the free world. So the message is do not count them out and expect them to fight back, even stealth, with unrestricted war.
All right, message received. Now, David, earlier you said, you talked a bit about the two sessions, and you know local people travel to address the central authorities, to petition, to raise issues of concern they may have. So can you just talk to us a bit about this? How does this petition system work? How is it handled by the regime?
Yeah, so in Beijing, you have this office that people supposedly you can go to ask questions to beg the authorities to get whatever it's causing the misery in their life to be solved there. In most cases, if the case is very impactful and is going to cause a lot of trouble for the government, they will physically send people, plainclothes cops, or just people to block these individuals from going to Beijing. They'll kidnap them, escort them into the police station, keep them from going to places like the airport or the train stations. And the goal here is to maintain stability, right? So the less noise you can cause, because remember, the two session, like any of its rubber stamp or official ceremonies, are supposed to be perfect. There's supposed to be no mistakes being made here. So if you have people who are literally telling you that there's something wrong with the country, well, that's the worst thing that can happen during these times. So that's why they ramp up surveillance, ramp up security, and ramp up the need that everything is simply, it's a Potemkin village and everything has to be perfect inside of it.
Okay, just a couple more comments here from each of you. Casey, I really wanted to get your thoughts on what do you expect when Trump meets Xi at their upcoming summit in April?
The last meeting was extremely weak. Xi Jinping definitely won that last meeting. In my opinion, Trump came back with his tail between his legs. This one, Trump's going in with extreme power. He's got 4 definite strong hits in his repertoire, and so he's coming in with a position of power in this next meeting. It'll be very interesting to see. Last time he came back and said he's going to allow 600,000 Chinese student spies back into the U.S. and in our U.S. universities. He allowed the technology, the latest technology of our AI chips with NVIDIA. And there are several other things that he came back that did not bode well for the United States. So it's going to be interesting to see. And hopefully he'll come back with a lot more wins than he did the last time.
Okay, so David, I'll give you the final thought here. You heard Casey say that President Trump is going into this meeting with tremendous power, and I was actually talking to Chris Chappell yesterday about this very issue, and he gave the analogy that you're seeing 2 mafia bosses going head-to-head, President Trump and Xi Jinping, and President Trump has the upper hand here. I made the joke yesterday, President Trump is going to make Xi Jinping an offer he can't refuse, but in all seriousness, David, give us your final thoughts on how you think the meeting is going to go.
Yeah, I agree with what Casey said. This meeting, if honestly, I have questions right now about whether Xi even wants to have this still, because right now there is really no cards in his hands that he can play to be a bargaining chip for Trump, because it's a total one-sided sway from when it was last in Korea. So I really do think that something is meant to be, in the sense that we're seeing this total shrink of China's global influence. So I think this time it's going to be very different than what we saw last year.
Okay, terrific comments. No surprise from both of you. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me.